Greetings everyone, I am EJ and this topic will serve as a continuation to the modernization theory as discussed by Joshua Batulan. How does a country's economy develop and grow? Are there patterns that apply to all countries, or is the path to growth and development unique to each? These questions will outline the theory of which we are about to learn in this lesson. So, without further ado, let's begin. Let's get to know first the proponent of this theory, Walt Whitman Rostow, born on 1916 and died on 2003. Rostow was an American economist, professor, and political official. He created stages of economic growth, or also known as Rostow'S modernization model. Rostow'S model was highly influential, shaping the way that many people thought that the country should grow and develop. He molded this theory after the Western world, believing that the development and success of the West should be the standard that other countries seek to attain. The main purpose of this model was to guide underdeveloped countries to reach their full potential. Its main characteristics are industrialization, urbanization, and economic growth and development. The Rostow's Stages of Economic Growth. It is a book that was published in 1960, detailing the steps or stages that should be taken by a country to properly develop. With that, Rostow defined the stages that a country must go through to become a fully developed nation. First, we have the traditional society, then the next stage would be preconditions to take off, then take off, drive to maturity, and lastly, the age of high mass consumption. The stages are characterized by a nation undergoing industrialization and urbanization. As the countries progress, each stage influences the other as the nation grows and experiences economic growth. Additionally, in each stage, one must take note that there are different economic and social characteristics that lead to the next stage of development. Let's talk about the traditional society as the first stage of economic growth. The traditional society that Rostow describes is the simplest form of society that is considered primitive and is characterized by subsistence agriculture, low productivity, and having no technological or scientific knowledge. When we talk about subsistence, it refers to producing just enough of something for survival or supporting oneself. In this type of society, everything is agriculturally based, with most people working in some part of the agriculture industry. Moreover, these people often do not believe that they can move up in society, and their social roles are usually fixed so that the future generations would likely remain in those same roles. Economic and social relations are typically governed by the tradition and custom rather than by market forces. Tradition rules how a society functions. What your parents do is what their parents did, and what you will do when you grow up too. Some examples that Rostow gave that reflects traditional society are the dynasties of China and the feudal Europe. The second stage of economic development is a transitional stage that establishes the conditions necessary to further growth and development. This stage is referred to as the preconditions to take off. So when a traditional society begins to shift to a more positive outlook with more opportunities arising, the preconditions to take off have begun. In this stage, a society begins to develop a more productive economy through investments in infrastructure, agriculture, and industry. Early manufacturing begins to take off. For example, more machinery enters the agricultural industry, moving away from purely a subsistence food supply, helping to grow more food and reduce labor intensiveness. Additionally, there is an increase in trade and the country starts to export goods. The population begins to move from rural areas to urban centers. We now move on to the takeoff stage. Takeoff is the stage in which industrialization begins to occur. After this industrialization, Then follows the increase in the production of goods that could be sold in faraway markets. Economic growth is achieved and better living standards are achieved by most people. Henceforth, technological advances are made and the country experiences a period of sustained economic growth. It is typically a relatively short period of intense growth. Urbanization also starts to increase as a result of rural-urban migration towards factories and cities. An example would be a developing society that has met the preconditions to take off and has begun to flourish. This society begins to centralize around a certain industry and economic growth dominates. In this stage, a few key industries are driving economic growth. Fun fact, during the 19th century, the famous Industrial Revolution and American Industrial Revolution took place. At that time, this placed the UK and the US in stage 3. Now, both the US and the UK sit comfortably in stage 5. Let us now move on to the fourth stage, which is the drive to maturity. The drive to maturity stage takes place over a long period of time as the society experiences levels of self-sustained growth. Allow me to emphasize, an important part of this stage is that society is able to self-sustain this growth, meaning it essentially supports itself and economic growth continues naturally. Industries start to develop further, and agricultural production goes down, investment increases, technology improves, skills diversify, urbanization intensifies, and further infrastructural improvements occur. There are vast infrastructure improvements, industries become internationalized, investments in technology are high, and the population becomes wealthier. This stage is best described as an economy moving from a few key industries to more diverse industries requiring an increasingly skilled workforce. Finally, we now move on to the last stage, which is the age of high mass consumption. The fifth stage is characterized by high levels of consumerism, where production is focused more on wants than needs. In this stage, the society becomes highly materialistic and consumer-oriented, and the economy is driven by demand for goods and services. Consumption is beyond the basic level, no longer consuming what is necessary, like food or shelter, but more on luxury items and luxury living. These powerful countries are characterized by high economic standing and economic growth. So Rostow'S model was created as a means of supporting underdeveloped countries. An advantage of the model is that it provides a framework for this to occur. Rostow'S model also provides some understanding of the state of economic world today and why there are more powerful countries than others. At the time, the model was a direct way of showing the US power over the communist Russia. Rostow'S attitude towards communism was reflected in the development model. Capitalist supremacy ruled over communist ideology and was the only future of successful development. From a political and historical perspective, Rostow'S model was triumphant. However, the same with all the theories that exist in today's world, there are also criticisms. So let's talk about the criticisms of the modernization theory. So it is said that it is just a new name for the idea that capitalism is the only way for a country to develop. It is because modernization theory assumes that economic development is at the primary goal of all societies and that Western capitalist economies are the ideal model for all societies to follow. In this sense, modernization theory promotes the idea that capitalist economic development is the only way to modernize and progress. The second criticism indicates that the theory provides an inadequate consideration of historical context. Critics also argue that the modernization theory sweeps a lot of historical factors under the rug when it explains European and North American progress. It does not address the obstacles to development that previously colonized regions faced, such as exploitation of resources, genocide, political domination during long periods of time, civil unrest, extreme poverty, and artificial boundaries, such as in that of Africa. The next criticism is the failure to account for environmental sustainability. So critics argue that Rostow's model is Eurocentric and only focuses on economic progress. This viewpoint ignores other important factors such as the negative impact on the environment and the exploitation of cheap labor. The theory does not account for the environmental consequence of rapid industrialization and economic growth, which can lead to harm to natural resources and ecosystems. Finally, critics of the modernization theory also see it as blaming the victim. In this view, the theory essentially blames poor countries for not being willing to accept change, putting the fault on their cultural values and traditions rather than acknowledging the outside forces that might be holding back those countries. So this is where the second theory of global stratification comes in, which is the dependency theory and the Latin American experience. Since this concept has already been introduced to you by Joshua, we'll just have a quick recap and I'll just add a few inputs about this particular concept. So, dependency theory and the Latin American experience. Dependency theory is an economic and social theory that suggests that the economic development of certain countries is hindered by their dependence on more powerful countries. So, this theory originated in the 1950s and 1960s as a critique of modernization theory, which argued that economic development could be achieved by following the same path as developed countries. Now, dependency theory emerged in response to the economic and social conditions of Latin America, which had been characterized by underdevelopment, poverty, and social inequality. The theory argues that Latin American countries were unable to develop their economies because they were too dependent on the developed countries of Europe and North America for technology, capital, and markets. So, my discussion now will focus on the two main sub-theories of the dependency theory, namely the North American neo-Marxist approach and the Latin American structuralist approach. So the two approaches, North American neo-Marxist and structuralist, both provide critical perspectives on the issue of underdevelopment in less developed countries. Andre Gunder Frank's approach challenges the idea that following the path taken by developed countries will inevitably lead to development for less developed countries. He argues that the dependency on the capitalist system is the root cause of underdevelopment rather than internal factors. This view emphasizes the importance of examining the broader political and economic context in which development takes place. On the other hand, the structuralist approach, developed mainly by Latin American scientists, focuses on the excessive reliance on exports and of primary commodities as a key factor in underdevelopment. This approach highlights the importance of diversifying exports and accelerating industrialization through import substitution as strategies to achieve autonomous and self-sustaining development. Additionally, one of the key concepts that distinguishes the historical structural version of dependency theory from previous ones is the identification of interest networks, including business, technocrats, the military, and the middle class, that bind the dynamics of local political and economic processes to material and political interest in the industrialized world. So this perspective acknowledges the complexity of dependent relations and allows for the possibility that the nature of these relations can change over time. Overall, both approaches highlight the need for a nuanced understanding of the factors that contribute to underdevelopment and the importance of examining the broader political and economic context in which development takes place. They offer critical perspectives that challenge conventional wisdom and highlight the need for alternative strategies to achieve sustainable and equitable development in less developed countries. So that would be all for my part. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you learned something.